I remember when I used to wipe the dirt off his knees and tell him he was a king. Now, my son looks at me like I'm a stain on his expensive Italian marble floors. My name is Eloise Vance, and at 75 years old, I realized that some people don't grow up, they just grow more entitled. I stood in the wings of the grand ballroom at the Queen City Club. The air smelled like expensive lilies and even more expensive lies. My son, Kendrick, was the man of the hour. He was the visionary of the year, a tech mogul who had forgotten the mother who worked 3 jobs to buy him his first computer. He looked sharp in his tuxedo, his skin glowing under the spotlight, but his eyes were cold as ice when they landed on me. "Mom, stay in the back," he had hissed at me earlier. "This is a high-profile charity auction. You're looking a little weathered. Just try not to talk to the donors." Weathered. That was the word he used for the wrinkles I earned praying for his success. The Bachelor and Experience auction was the highlight of the night. Local celebrities were auctioning off dates and luxury trips for charity. But Kendrick had a surprise planned. He stepped up to the microphone, a smug grin spreading across his face as he scanned the room of Charlotte's elite. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kendrick announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "We've seen some incredible items tonight. But now, for a bit of a joke to lighten the mood before our final big-ticket item, I want to auction off something truly old." A few people chuckled. My heart began to drum against my ribs. "I give you my mother, Eloise," he said, gesturing wildly toward me. I was forced to walk out onto the stage. The bright lights blinded me, making my old bones ache. She's 75, she's obsessed with gardening, and she still thinks a flip phone is high technology. She's essentially a piece of antique furniture that complains about the draft. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't kind laughter. It was the sound of wealthy sharks smelling blood in the water. I looked at Kendrick, hoping to see a wink, a sign that this was a playful prank. But there was only mockery in his gaze. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the city's power players to prove how far he'd risen above his humble roots. "Let's start the bidding for a weekend of boredom and unsolicited advice." Kendrick laughed, leaning into the mic. "Do I hear a penny?" "No." "How about $1? Who will give me $1 for my boring mom?" The silence that followed was louder than the laughter. It was a vacuum of disrespect. Then, a man in the front row raised his hand, snickering. $1. Kendrick roared with laughter. "Going once for $1. Going twice." I felt the tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I have lived through the Jim Crow era, through the loss of my husband, and through the struggle of the streets. I wouldn't cry for a man I raised who had clearly lost his soul. "Is that it?" Kendrick mocked. "Only $1 for the woman who birthed the great Kendrick Vance. I guess the market has spoken on your value, Mom." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. A man walked in, draped in a coat that cost more than Kendrick's entire house. He didn't look at the stage. He looked at me. His presence silenced the entire room. He didn't raise a hand. He just spoke. $1 million. The microphone slipped from Kendrick's hand, hitting the floor with a deafening screech of feedback. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned. Kendrick's face went from mahogany to a sickly, pale gray. "I'm sorry," Kendrick stammered, grabbing the mic back. "Sir, this is a joke item. You can't." "I don't joke about investments," the stranger said, stepping into the light. "And I certainly don't joke about gold when it's being sold for the price of lead. $1 million. For the lady." I looked at the stranger. I didn't know him, but I knew that look. It was the look of a man who knew a secret. And as he smiled at me, I realized that my son's little joke had just handed me the keys to his destruction. Do you want to know who this mysterious stranger is and how my plans to use that $1 million to dismantle my son's empire? Subscribe right now and comment revenge below if you think Kendrick deserves what's coming to him. Don't miss out on any detail because the fallout is legendary. The tension in that room was so thick you could have cut it with a rusted butter knife. Kendrick's face was a map of confusion and greed. He didn't know whether to be offended or to start calculating his commission for the charity. But me, I stood there, 75 years of life etched into my skin, looking at the man who had just valued me at $1 million. The stranger stepped forward. He was tall, with a salt and pepper beard trimmed to perfection, and a suit that shimmered like midnight over the Atlantic. He didn't look like the tech bros Kendrick ran with. He looked like old money, the kind of money that doesn't need to shout to be heard. "I believe the gavel has hit the block, Mr. Vance," the stranger said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded the entire ballroom. $1 million to the Queen City Children's Hospital in honor of Mrs. Eloise Vance. Kendrick scrambled, his polished persona cracking at the seams. Of course. A record-breaking bid. Sir, I didn't catch your name." "The name is Solomon Sterling," the man replied. The room gasped. Solomon Sterling was a ghost in Charlotte, a billionaire developer who owned half the skyline, but never showed his face at these shallow parties. He looked at me, ignoring my son entirely, and I believe I've just purchased a weekend of unsolicited advice. "I hope you're ready to talk. Eloise, I have a feeling you have a lot to say." Kendrick tried to push his way between us, his eyes darting around to see if the cameras were catching his charitable moment. "Mr. Sterling, this is incredible. My mother is, well, she's a character. I'm sure you'll find her stories about the old neighborhood quite quaint." "Quaint." Solomon's eyes narrowed. "I find nothing quaint about the woman who managed the logistics for the city's largest textile union 30 years ago, or the woman who sat on the board of the first credit union for our people in this county. Did you forget those parts of her resume, Kendrick, or were you too busy looking at your own reflection?" The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the scent of Kendrick's humiliation. My son's jaw dropped. He didn't know those things. He thought I was just the lady who made sweet potato pie and folded his laundry. He never asked about my life before him. He never cared to know that the hands he mocked had built the foundations he was currently standing on. I think there's been a misunderstanding," Kendrick stammered, his sweat beginning to ruin his high-collared shirt. "The only misunderstanding is that you think you own this stage," I said, finally finding my voice. It wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the hall. "You auctioned me off for $1. Kendrick, you told these people I was boring. You told them I was a piece of antique furniture. Well, the furniture is moving out." I turned to Solomon. "Mr. Sterling, I don't need a weekend to give you advice. I can start right now, but it won't be in this room." "I have a car waiting," Solomon said, offering me his arm. As we walked toward the exit, the socialites who had been laughing minutes ago were now whispering in hushed, terrified tones. Kendrick chased after us, his heels clicking frantically on the marble. "Mom, wait. We need to talk about the press release. This is huge for the Vance Foundation," he hissed, grabbing my elbow. I stopped and looked at his hand until he let go. "The Vance Foundation? Kendrick, you named that after yourself. You didn't name it after your father, and you certainly didn't build it on honesty. From this moment on, don't call me Mom. To you, I'm just the woman who was worth $1. Let's see how much your foundation is worth when the world finds out how you treat your investments." We walked out into the cool Charlotte night. A black limousine sat idling at the curb. Solomon opened the door for me, a gesture of respect I hadn't received from my own flesh and blood in a decade. "Why?" I asked as the door closed. shielding us from the flashing lights of the paparazzi who were already swarming the club. Why $1 million for a woman you don't even know? Solomon leaned back, the interior of the car glowing with soft blue light. Oh, I know you, Eloise. You don't remember, do you? 40 years ago, a young man was trying to get a loan to start a construction company. Every bank in the city laughed him out of the building. But a woman at a small credit union looked at his plans, saw his heart, and signed the papers herself. She told him, "Don't just build buildings, Solomon. Build a legacy." My heart skipped a beat. The skinny boy with the blueprints. "Solomon, I've been watching Kendrick," he said, his face hardening. "I've watched him strip your name off the house. I've watched him move you into that small apartment while he lives in a mansion you helped pay for. I was waiting for the right moment to step in. He thinks he's the king of this city, but he's forgotten one thing." "What's that?" I asked. "He's playing a game on a board that you and I own," Solomon smiled. "Now, Eloise, I heard Kendrick is looking to expand his tech headquarters into the West End. My company owns the land, and as of tonight, you are the chairperson of my new development board. If Kendrick wants his empire to survive, he's going to have to come to you, on his knees." I looked out the window as we passed Kendrick's glittering office tower. I had spent 75 years being kind. I had spent a lifetime being patient. But Kendrick had wanted an auction. He wanted to see what I was worth. He was about to find out that the cost of betraying a mother is everything he holds dear. The engine of the limousine hummed a low, expensive tune as we pulled away from the curb, leaving Kendrick standing under the neon lights of the club like a discarded toy. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a mother waiting for a phone call that never came. I felt like a general. Solomon Sterling handed me a crystal glass of sparkling water. His eyes were sharp, reflecting the city lights of Charlotte as we cruised down Trade Street. "You've been playing small for too long, Eloise," he said. "Your son thinks wealth is about the zeros in a bank account. He doesn't realize that true power is about who owns the dirt those banks are built on." I looked at my hands. They were spotted with age, the knuckles slightly swollen from years of hard work. "He took my name off the family house, Solomon. He told me the neighborhood was transitioning and that I'd be more comfortable in a managed care facility. He sold my memories to a developer for a kickback." Solomon leaned forward, his face hardening. "The developer he sold to was a subsidiary of my firm. I bought your childhood home 6 months ago. Eloise, I've been holding the deed. It's not a condo. It's still your house. And as of tomorrow, it's the headquarters for the Sterling Vance Urban Initiative." My breath caught. Kendrick had been bragging for weeks about a new tech corridor he was building in the West End. He called it the Vance Vision. He had already taken out massive high-interest loans, betting everything on the city council approving his zoning permits. "He's over-leveraged, isn't he?" I asked, a spark of the old credit union manager flickering in my chest. "He's drowning," Solomon confirmed. "He's been using his foundation's funds to cover his personal margins. If he doesn't get the West End permits by the end of the month, the banks will trigger a margin call. He'll lose the tower, the cars, and his reputation. And guess who sits on the zoning board as the new community representative?" A slow smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, yet right. Me. The next morning, I didn't dress in the drab grandma sweaters Kendrick bought me. I went into the back of my closet and pulled out a vintage power suit, royal blue with gold buttons that caught the morning sun. I did my hair, pinned my brooch, and walked into the City Hall conference room like I owned the oxygen inside it. The board members were already seated. At the head of the long oak table sat Kendrick. He was wearing a different suit today, trying to look unbothered, but the dark circles under his eyes told a different story. When I walked in, his coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "Mom, What are you doing here? He hissed, standing up. This is a closed-door session for the West End Development Project. Security. Sit down. Kendrick, the board chairman, a stern man named Mr. Henderson, barked. Mrs. Vance is our new lead consultant for community impact. Mr. Sterling appointed her personally. She has total veto power over the environmental and social heritage clauses of your proposal. Kendrick's face turned a shade of purple I'd only seen on ripe plums. This is a conflict of interest. She's my mother. She doesn't know the first thing about urban tech infrastructure. I pulled out a leather-bound folder and slid it across the table. Actually, Kendrick, I know quite a bit. For instance, I know that your vision involves demolishing 3 historic churches and a low-income senior center to make room for a digital meditation garden. I also know that your firm hasn't conducted a proper soil toxicity report on the old industrial site. Mom, stop this, Kendrick pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper as the other board members began to murmur. You're embarrassing me. We can talk about this at dinner. I'll buy you that cruise you wanted. I don't want a cruise, Kendrick, I said, my voice ringing clear through the room. I want to talk about the value you mentioned last night. You see, this board requires a unanimous vote for approval. And as of right now, my vote is a no. Your project is stalled indefinitely. The room erupted. Kendrick's phone began to buzz incessantly, likely his investors sensing the blood in the water. He looked at me with a hatred so pure it should have burned. You're destroying me, he spat, leaning over the table. If this doesn't go through, I lose everything. Is that what you want? To see your own son in the gutter? I stood up, smoothing my jacket. You auctioned me for $1. Kendrick, you told the world I was boring and useless. I'm just showing you that useless things can be very expensive to lose. If you want this project to move forward, you'll meet me at the old house at 6 p.m. Alone. And you better bring a pen. I walked out of that room without looking back. I could hear him screaming my name, but for the first time in 75 years, I wasn't listening. I had spent my life building him up. Now, I was going to enjoy watching him realize he was nothing without the woman he tried to sell for $1. The air in Charlotte was thick with humidity as the sun began to dip behind the skyline, casting long, jagged shadows over the West End. I stood on the porch of the house Kendrick had tried to erase from my life. It was a sturdy craftsman built with honest lumber and sweat. It looked small compared to the glass boxes Kendrick liked to build, but it had survived storms that would have shattered his ego. At exactly 6 p.m., a sleek silver sports car screeched to a halt at the curb. Kendrick jumped out, his silk tie loosened and his hair disheveled. He looked like a man who had spent the last 6 hours watching his net worth evaporate. He stormed up the wooden steps, the boards creaking under his expensive loafers. "Are you happy now?" he yelled, not even bothering with a greeting. "My lead investors just pulled out. The bank called me 3 times this afternoon asking about collateral instability. You're ruining my life over a joke at a party." "A joke, Mom?" I rocked slowly in the chair I had reclaimed from the garage. "A joke is only funny if everyone is laughing. Kendrick, I wasn't laughing, and neither is Solomon Sterling." He paced the porch like a caged animal. "Solomon Sterling is using you. He's an old shark. He just wants my land, and he's using your hurt feelings to get it. Don't you see that? He's playing you." "No, Kendrick," I said, my voice as steady as the foundation beneath us. "He's paying me back for a kindness I showed him 40 years ago. Something you wouldn't understand. Kindness isn't a transaction for you. It's a weakness. Well, today that weakness is the only thing that can save your company." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Fine. What do you want? Money? I'll give you a monthly allowance. 5,000? 10. Just sign the zoning waiver, so I can break ground on Monday." I laughed, and it sounded like dry leaves skittering across the pavement. "A monthly allowance? You still don't get it. You tried to sell me for $1. You told a room full of people I was antique furniture. You don't get to offer me an allowance from the money I helped you make." I pulled a legal document from my lap. It wasn't the waiver. "This is a total restructuring of the Vance Vision Project." I explained. "First, 50% of the residential units must be designated for low-income seniors. No digital meditation gardens. We're building a community kitchen and a health clinic. Second, you are stepping down as CEO of the development wing. You'll stay on as a consultant, but I will be the one with final signature authority." Kendrick let out a hysterical laugh. You want to run a multi-million-dollar tech corridor. You can't even navigate a spreadsheet. I navigated your father's medical bills, your college tuition, and the startup costs for your first business while you were out partying. I snapped, standing up. "I know how to balance a ledger better than you ever will. My old brain remembers how to build things that last. You only know how to build things that look good on a screen." "I won't do it," he hissed. "I'll fight you in court. I'll tell the judge you're mentally incompetent. I'll have you committed before I let you take my company." I leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "Try it. Solomon has the best lawyers in the South. And don't forget, I have the footage from last night. The world has already seen how you treat your mother. How do you think a jury, or your board of directors, will feel when I release the emails where you discussed phasing me out of my own home to save on taxes?" Kendrick froze. He had forgotten about the paper trail. He had been so arrogant, he thought I was too boring to ever look at his files. "You went through my computer," he whispered, horrified. "No," I smiled. "You left your laptop open on the kitchen island last Christmas while you were bragging about your new jet. I didn't need to be a hacker. Kendrick, I just needed to be a mother who pays attention." He slumped against the porch railing, the fight leaving his body. The visionary was gone. In his place was the small, selfish boy who used to hide his broken toys under the bed, so he wouldn't get in trouble. "Sign it, Kendrick," I said, handing him the pen. "Sign it, or by noon tomorrow, Sterling will trigger the buyout clause on your debt. You'll be left with that $1 you thought I was worth. And trust me, in this city, $1 won't even get you a bus ride away from the mess you made." His hand trembled as he took the pen. He looked at the paper, then at me. For a second, I saw a flash of the sun I used to love. But then he looked at the house with such disdain that I knew I was doing the right thing. He signed his name in a jagged, angry script. "I hate you," he whispered. "I know," I replied, taking the paper back. "But you'll respect me, and that's a start." As he walked back to his car, I realized the revenge was only just beginning. Controlling his company was step one. Reclaiming the neighborhood he tried to destroy was step two. But step three? That was going to be the most delicious part of all. I didn't take a taxi to the Vance Tower the next morning. Solomon Sterling sent a vintage black Cadillac, the kind of car that doesn't just arrive. It announces an era. I stepped out in front of the glass skyscraper, my cane clicking rhythmically against the pavement. The security guards, who usually looked through me like I was transparent, now stood up straight. They had seen the news. They had seen the $1 million auction. "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," the lead guard said, dipping his head. "Good morning, James," I replied. I remembered his name. Kendrick never did. "I believe I have a meeting on the 40th floor." The elevator ride was silent, but my mind was loud. I was 75, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't playing the supporting role. When the doors opened, the lobby was frantic. Assistants were running with papers, and the air tasted like panic. At the center of the chaos stood Kendrick, trying to rally his executive team. "It's a temporary oversight." Kendrick was shouting. "The zoning board is just performing a standard audit. We'll be back on track by—" He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. The room went dead silent. The young executives, men and women in their 30s who thought old meant a filter on a photo app, stared at me like I was a ghost. "Gentlemen, ladies," I said, walking toward the head of the conference table. "I believe there's been a change in the weather." "Kendrick, you're in my seat." "Mom, don't do this here," Kendrick hissed, rushing over to intercept me. "We have a private agreement. You don't need to embarrass me in front of my staff." "Your staff?" I raised an eyebrow. "According to the papers you signed on my porch last night, this staff now reports to the Sterling Vance Oversight Committee. And since I am the chair, that means they report to me. Now move." He hesitated, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. But he saw the look in the eyes of his chief financial officer, a woman named Regina who I knew had been tired of Kendrick's ego for years. She pulled out the chair for me. "Welcome, Mrs. Vance," Regina said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "We've prepared the Q3 projections you requested through Mr. Sterling's office." I sat down and spread my folders out. "Thank you, Regina. Now let's look at these personal expenses labeled as research and development. Kendrick, I see a $300,000 charge for a private villa in Ibiza. Was that a tech convention? Or was that the week you told me you were too busy to come to your aunt's funeral?" The room gasped. Kendrick looked like he wanted to vanish through the floorboards. "That was a networking event," he stammered. "High-level investors were present. The only thing you were networking with was a bottle of expensive champagne," I said, sliding a photo across the table. A social media post one of his friends had tagged him in that same week. "This company is bleeding money because its leader thinks he's a king instead of a servant to the community. That ends today. Effective immediately, all executive bonuses are frozen. We are redirecting those funds to the West End Senior Housing Project." "You can't do that," one of the junior VPs shouted. "Our contracts guarantee those bonuses." I looked at him, a young man who looked like he'd never seen a day of hard labor in his life. "Your contracts were signed with a company that was technically insolvent until 12 hours ago. If you don't like the new terms, my legal team has severance packages ready. They consist of 1 month's pay and a very stern lesson in humility. Any takers?" Nobody moved. They knew the market. They knew that being fired by Eloise Vance and Solomon Sterling meant they were radioactive in this town. Kendrick leaned over the table, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. "You're killing the brand, Mom. People buy into Vance because it's sleek, it's modern, it's the future. You're turning it into a charity ward. I'm turning it into something that won't fall down when the wind blows." "Kendrick," I replied, "and speaking of the future, I've decided on your first assignment as a consultant. You've spent a lot of time talking about how boring the old neighborhood is. So, you're going to spend the next month on site, in a hard hat, overseeing the demolition of the asbestos in the old warehouse. Personally." The silence that followed was absolute. Kendrick, the man who wouldn't even walk on grass if it might stain his shoes, was being sent to a construction site. "You're joking?" he whispered. "I don't joke about investments," I said, echoing Solomon's words from the night before. "Now, get out of my office. I have a city to rebuild." As Kendrick walked out, his head hanging low, the remaining staff looked at me with a newfound terror and a glimmer of respect. I wasn't just a boring mom anymore. I was the woman who had just hijacked a billion-dollar dream and turned it into a reckoning. The Charlotte sun was unforgiving, reflecting off the glass towers of the city like 1,000 judgmental eyes. But down in the West End, the heat felt different. It felt like justice. I watched from the air-conditioned comfort of my vintage Cadillac as my son, Kendrick, stepped onto the red clay of the construction site. He looked ridiculous in a neon safety vest that cost more than the average worker's weekly pay. His designer jeans, already dusted with the grit of the neighborhood he had tried to sell out. He doesn't look so visionary now, does he? Solomon Sterling said from the seat beside me. He was holding a file labeled Vance Vision Phase 2. He looks like a boy who finally realized that dirt doesn't wash off as easily as a bad reputation. I replied. I rolled down the window, letting the roar of the jackhammers and the smell of old brick dust fill the car. Kendrick was arguing with a foreman, a man named Cassius, who had lived in this neighborhood for 60 years. Cassius wasn't impressed by Kendrick's title or his tantrums. He just pointed at a pile of debris and then at a shovel. I need you to see this, Solomon, I said, handing him a tablet. While Kendrick is busy playing laborer, I've been digging into the secondary accounts. He wasn't just over-leveraged. He was siphoning. He has a shell company called V-Future, registered in the Cayman Islands. He's been moving the foundation's charity donations into it for 3 years. Solomon's face went cold. That's not just ego, Eloise. That's a federal crime. If the authorities find out, they won't just take his company. They'll take his freedom. I looked back at my son. He was struggling to lift a piece of timber, his face red and sweat-streaked. A part of me, the mother part that still remembered his first steps, felt a pang of sorrow. But then I remembered the auction. I remembered him laughing as a stranger bid $1 for my dignity. I remembered the way he talked about clearing out the dead weight of the neighborhood. He needs to feel the weight of what he's stolen, I said firmly. I'm not calling the police. Not yet. I want him to confess. I want him to look the people he robbed in the eye and tell them why their community center didn't get the funding he promised. I stepped out of the car. The heat hit me like a physical wall, but I didn't flinch. I walked right up to the edge of the excavation pit, where Kendrick was leaning against a shovel, panting. Hard work, isn't it? I asked. He looked up, wiping grime across his forehead. Are you satisfied? You've turned me into a laughingstock. The guys on the crew are taking pictures of me. It's all over the local business blogs. The fallen Prince of Charlotte. You fell because you built your throne on sand. Kendrick, I told him. I didn't push you. I just stopped holding you up. Now, tell me about V-Future. The shovel slipped from his hand and clattered against a stone. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the Georgia peach glow of the afternoon sun. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to a woman who used to check your browser history when you were 12. I snapped. I have the wire transfer logs. You stole from the Senior Center Fund to pay for that villa in Ibiza. You stole from the Children's Literacy Program to buy your mistress a diamond-encrusted watch. Every dollar you took came from the pockets of people like Cassius. Kendrick looked around frantically, making sure the crew was out of earshot. Mom, please. I was going to put it back. Once the West End project launched, the IPO would have covered everything. I just needed a bridge loan. You used your mother as a bridge? No, you used me as a joke to distract your investors from the fact that you're a thief. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut sharper than a razor. By sunset tomorrow, I want every cent returned to the foundation's main account. If it's not there, I'm handing this tablet to the district attorney, and Solomon Sterling will make sure they don't offer you a plea deal. I can't get that much liquid cash in 24 hours, he cried, his voice cracking. I'd have to sell the penthouse. I'd have to sell my shares. Then start listing them. I said, maybe you can find someone to buy them for $1. I hear that's a fair price for something old and broken. I turned my back on him and walked away. I could hear him screaming behind me, words that no son should ever say to his mother. But I didn't stop. I had spent 75 years being the boring woman who kept the peace. That woman died on that auction stage. The woman walking away now was the owner of the dirt, the debt, and the destiny of the Vance name. As I got back into the car, Solomon looked at me with a mix of awe and caution. You're playing a dangerous game. Eloise. A cornered animal bites. Let him bite, I said, staring straight ahead. I've got thick skin. And besides, I'm not done with the auction yet. There's one more thing I need to sell. I sat in my new office, the top floor of the very building Kendrick had tried to build on lies. Solomon Sterling sat across from me, his fingers steepled. He looked troubled. Eloise, you've squeezed him hard, Solomon said. But my people tell me Kendrick didn't go to the bank this morning. He didn't call his broker to sell his shares. He went to a private club in Uptown. He met with a man named Julian Vane. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Julian Vane was a predator in a pinstripe suit. He was known for vulture capitalism, buying up distressed assets, stripping them for parts, and leaving everyone involved in ruins. If Kendrick was talking to Julian, it meant he wasn't trying to fix his mess. He was trying to burn the house down to collect the insurance. He's going to try to sell the company out from under us. I whispered. He can't, Solomon reminded me. You have signature authority. He doesn't need to sell the whole company. I realized, my mind racing. He's going to sell the intellectual property, the Vance Vision patents. If he transfers those to Julian for a nominal fee, the development project becomes a hollow shell. We'll own the land, but we won't have the tech to build the smart city he promised the council. We'll be stuck with a dirt pit and $1 billion debt. I didn't wait for Solomon to reply. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. I need to go to the penthouse. That's where he keeps the physical backup drives. If he's meeting Julian tonight to sign over the IP, he'll need those drives to finalize the deal. When I arrived at the penthouse, the air was still. The gold-plated doors opened to a scene of frantic destruction. Kendrick had tossed the place. Suitcases were half-packed, and his safe was standing wide open, empty. He wasn't just planning a business move. He was planning to vanish. Looking for these? I turned around. Kendrick was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights of Charlotte twinkling behind him like a sea of diamonds. In his hand, he held two small, sleek hard drives. His face was a mask of cold, calculated desperation. You really thought you could turn me into a construction worker, and I'd just say thank you? He sneered. You think you're so smart because you managed a credit union in the 80s? This is a different world, Mom. In this world, the person with the data wins. Julian Vane will eat you alive. Kendrick, I said, stepping into the room. He doesn't want to partner with you. He wants to use your patents to bankrupt Solomon, and once he's done, he'll toss you to the feds for the V-Future fraud. You're trading a prison cell for a slightly bigger prison cell. At least I'll be rich in that cell. Kendrick yelled, his voice echoing off the glass. I'm not going back to being poor Eloise's son. I'm Kendrick Vance. I'm a brand. I'm a legend. You're a thief, I corrected him. And you're a coward. You couldn't even auction me off with a straight face. You had to make it a joke because you knew, deep down, you weren't worth the dirt on my shoes. He lunged toward me, his hand raised as if to strike, but he stopped. Even in his madness, something held him back. Or maybe it was the shadow that appeared in the doorway behind me. Two men in dark suits stepped in. They weren't Solomon's men. They were wearing badges. Kendrick Vance, one of them asked, "We're with the State Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of foundation funds and suspected wire fraud." Kendrick looked at the agents, then at the hard drives. then at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, pathetic terror. Mom, did you call them? You said I had until sunset tomorrow. I lied. I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor. That's what you taught me, isn't it? That people are just items to be used and discarded? I decided to use you to clean up the city. You're the last piece of trash I'm clearing out of the West End. As they clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists, the hard drives fell to the floor. I picked them up. Kendrick was sobbing now, the visionary reduced to a blubbering mess as they led him toward the elevator. You can't do this, he screamed. I'm your son. I'm your only son. I stood by the window and watched the blue and red lights of the police cars reflecting on the glass. I had a son, I whispered to the empty room. But he died a long time ago. All that's left is $1's worth of regret. I looked down at the hard drives in my hand. The IP was worth millions. The land was worth even more. But as I stood in that empty, cold penthouse, I realized the most valuable thing I owned wasn't the company. It was the truth. The penthouse was silent, save for the distant wail of sirens fading into the Charlotte night. I held the hard drives, the brain of Kendrick's empire, and felt their weight. It wasn't just metal and plastic, it was the stolen dreams of 1,000 people. But my victory felt hollow because I knew the snake's head hadn't been cut off yet. Julian Vane was still out there, and men like him don't just walk away from a billion-dollar feast. I didn't have to wait long. 2 hours after the police dragged Kendrick away, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Mrs. Vance, a voice smooth as expensive silk whispered, I believe you have something of mine. Or rather, something your son promised me in exchange for his, let's call it freedom from his debts. Julian Vane, I said, sitting at Kendrick's oversized mahogany desk. You're late. The party's over. The police already took the trash out. The police are a minor inconvenience. Eloise, Julian chuckled. Kendrick is a small fish. I don't care about his fraud. I care about the patents on those drives. The smart grid algorithms that can control the energy flow of an entire city. Your son signed a letter of intent. In the eyes of the law, those patents belong to Vane International the moment he defaults on his loan to me, which as of midnight he has. I looked at the clock. It was 11:15 p.m. He didn't have the authority to sign those over. I took control of the board yesterday. The paperwork he showed me was dated 3 days ago, Julian countered. Predated, actually. He was desperate. Now I can spend the next 5 years tying you up in court, draining every cent of that $1 million Solomon Sterling gave you, or you can hand over the drives and walk away with your dignity intact. What's it going to be? I felt a surge of heat in my chest. This man thought I was a pushover. He thought because I was 75, I didn't understand the game. He forgot that I spent 40 years at a credit union dealing with men who tried to hide their greed behind fine print. I'll tell you what's going to be, Julian, I said, my voice steady. I'm going to meet you. Tonight. At the old construction site in the West End. If you want these drives, you're going to have to come get them from the dirt they were meant to serve. A bit dramatic, don't you think? Julian sneered. But fine. 30 minutes. I called Solomon. I need the crew. All of them. And I need the press. When I arrived at the construction site, the red North Carolina clay was damp with evening dew. The site was illuminated by a few flickering work lights. Julian Vane stepped out of a silver Maybach, looking like a ghost in his pale gray suit. He looked at the mud on his shoes with visible disgust. Give me the drives, Eloise, he said, holding out a gloved hand. Don't make this difficult. You've already lost your son. Don't lose your house, too. You talk a lot about owning things, Julian, I said, stepping forward. But you don't own this neighborhood. You see those lights? I pointed to the surrounding houses. One by one, porches started to light up. People started stepping out onto the street. The seniors, the families, the workers. Solomon had made the calls. These people are the shareholders now. I announced. I didn't just take over the company. I converted it into a community-owned land trust. Every patent on these drives has been released under an open-source license to the city of Charlotte. You can't sue me for them because I don't own them anymore. The public does. Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. You stupid old woman. You just threw away a fortune. You could have been the richest woman in the state. I've been rich my whole life, Julian, I said, tossing the hard drives into the mud at his feet. I had a husband who loved me, a community that respected me, and a conscience that let me sleep at night. You have a silver car and a heart full of ash. As the cameras of the local news crews, tipped off by Solomon, began to flash from the perimeter, Julian realized he had been trapped. He couldn't threaten me in front of the world. He couldn't sue a city for a gift they had already accepted. He looked at the drives in the mud, then at the crowd of people who were cheering for the boring mom who had just saved their homes. He got back into his car without a word, the tires spinning in the red clay, splashing mud all over his pristine suit. I stood there, breathing in the cool air as the neighborhood gathered around me. I was tired. My bones ached. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was home. The dust had settled on the construction site, but the storm in the courtrooms was just beginning. Julian Vane had slunk back into the shadows, his reputation tarnished by the evening news. But as the sun rose over Charlotte the next morning, I realized that winning a war isn't the same as healing the wounds. My son was behind bars, and the empire I now controlled was a tangled web of secrets. I sat in the visiting room of the Mecklenburg County Jail. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and regret. On the other side of the plexiglass, Kendrick looked like a different person. His designer stubble had grown into a patchy, unkempt beard, and the orange jumpsuit drained the life from his skin. I suppose you're here to gloat, he said, his voice cracking. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I'm here because I'm your mother, I replied, and because I found something in the V-Future accounts that didn't make sense. There was a final wire transfer. Kendrick, $2 million, moved an hour before you were arrested. It didn't go to Julian Vane. Where did it go? Kendrick finally looked up, and for the first time, I saw genuine, paralyzing fear in his eyes. You shouldn't have looked, Mom. You should have just let it go. That money, it wasn't mine. And it wasn't the Foundation's. Then whose was it? The cartel, he whispered, leaning as close to the glass as the guards would allow. The tech corridor. It wasn't just about smart cities. Julian wasn't the biggest shark in the water. I was using their offshore accounts to wash the development funds. I thought I could outsmart them. I thought I could use their capital to build my dream and pay them back before they noticed. My blood ran cold. My son hadn't just been a thief. He had been a conduit for some of the most dangerous people on the planet. And by taking over the company and making everything public, I hadn't just saved the neighborhood. I had stolen $2 million from people who don't file lawsuits. They fire bullets. They think I have the money, Mom. Kendrick sobbed, his hands shaking against the glass. But the transfer failed. It's stuck in a digital escrow that only my biometric key can release. And now that I'm in here, they're going to come for the next best thing. They're going to come for you. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had spent my life protecting this boy, and even in his downfall, he had managed to place a target on my back. Where is the key, Kendrick? I demanded. It's not a physical key, he said. It's a sequence hidden in the garden at the old house. I buried a hardware wallet under the azaleas we planted when I was 10. I thought it was poetic. If anything happened to me, I wanted it to be near you. Poetic? I hissed. You've turned my home into a crime scene. I left the jail, without saying goodbye. I didn't have time for tears. I called Solomon, sterling the moment I hit the parking lot. Solomon, I need a security detail at the Craftsman house. Now. And tell them to bring shovels. As I raced toward the West End, I saw a black SUV following my Cadillac. It didn't have a license plate. They were already moving. My revenge had just turned into a fight for survival. I had humiliated my son and outplayed a billionaire, but now I was facing an enemy that didn't care about public opinion or community land trusts. I pulled into the driveway of my old home, the place Kendrick had tried to sell for $1. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the porch. I grabbed a garden spade from the shed, my 75-year-old muscles screaming in protest. I dug like a woman possessed. The dirt under the azaleas was hard and dry, but I didn't stop until my blade hit something metallic. I pulled out a small waterproof box. Inside was a sleek silver drive. A car door slammed behind me. That belongs to us, Mrs. Vance. I turned around. 2 men stood at the edge of my lawn. They weren't wearing suits. They were wearing tactical jackets, and the look in their eyes told me that no amount of unsolicited advice was going to save me this time. You want the money? I asked, holding the drive over the porch railing, where a steep drop led to the stone cellar entrance. Then you better hope you're faster than a 75-year-old woman with a grudge. The silence of the West End was shattered by the low rumble of that black SUV's engine. I stood on my porch, the hardware wallet clutched in my hand, looking at the men who thought a grandmother was an easy target. They didn't know that a woman who has survived 75 years of struggle doesn't fear the dark. She knows how to use it. Give us the drive, Eloise, the taller man said, his voice a cold rasp. Your son already cost us enough time. Don't make us add a funeral to the bill. I looked at the silver drive, then back at them. You know, my son auctioned me off for $1 because he thought I was old. He thought old things were useless. But the thing about old tools is that they were built to last, and they were built to strike hard. I didn't hand them the drive. I dropped it. As it fell toward the stone cellar entrance, both men lunged forward. That was their first mistake. They thought I was the prize. They forgot that this house was my territory. As they stepped onto the porch steps, I pulled the heavy brass lever I'd had Solomon's crew install yesterday under the guise of structural repairs. The top 2 wooden steps gave way, a trapdoor for the greedy. The men stumbled, their shins cracking against the frame. While they scrambled for balance, the porch floodlights roared to life, blinding them. But it wasn't just lights. From the shadows of the neighboring houses, 30 men and women stepped onto the street. Cassius was in the lead, holding a heavy iron wrench. Solomon was beside him, backed by a security team that actually knew how to handle a threat. This is a neighborhood watch, gentlemen, I shouted over the confusion. And you're trespassing on a community land trust. The police are 90 seconds away. If I were you, I'd take your bruised shins and that empty SUV and disappear before Charlotte finds out what you look like under these lights. The men looked at the crowd. They saw a community that had been pushed too far, led by a woman they had deeply underestimated. They didn't see a boring mom. They saw the Queen of the West End. They scrambled back to their vehicle and tore away into the night, leaving nothing but the smell of burnt rubber. I walked down the steps and picked up the drive. It was a decoy. The real money had already been rerouted by Solomon's tech team the moment I signaled them from the jail. 3 months later, the West End was transformed. The Vance Vision was gone, replaced by the Eloise Vance Heritage Center. We had a clinic, a library, and the best senior housing in the South. I visited Kendrick one last time before his transfer to federal prison. He looked broken, but for the first time, he looked honest. I lost everything, didn't I? he asked through the glass. No, Kendrick, I said gently, you lost the lies. You still have a mother. And when you get out in 10 years, maybe you'll finally be worth more than that dollar you joked about. I walked out of the prison and into the bright Charlotte afternoon. Solomon was waiting for me in the Cadillac. What's next, Eloise? He asked with a smile. Retirement? A real cruise this time. I looked at the skyline, the city I helped build, the city I saved, and the city that finally knew my name. I smoothed my royal blue suit and adjusted my gold brooch. Retirement is for people who are finished, Solomon, I said, leaning back into the leather seat. I'm just getting started. I hear there's an auction for a new development in the East End tomorrow. And I think I've got just enough vintage energy to stir up some trouble. And that, my friends, is how you turn a dollar insult into $1 million empire. I proved that you should never, ever count out the woman who raised you. She took the betrayal, the greed, and the disrespect and turned it into a legacy that will last forever. Kendrick got what he deserved, and the West End finally got a hero. If you loved this ending and want to see more high-stakes revenge stories, you know what to do. Smash that subscribe button, hit the like for the YouTube algorithm, and comment legacy below to show some love for Eloise. This has been Vintage Vengeance, where the past always catches up to the present. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.